The stage of America's Got Talent has seen countless dreamers, but on this night, the audience didn't know they were about to witness a story that would leave a permanent mark on their hearts. A small boy, no older than 12, walked nervously across the stage. His hands clutched the microphone so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. The judges watched curiously, waiting for him to introduce himself, but even before he spoke, there was something in his eyes, something deeper than nerves. With a shaky breath, he looked up at Simon Cowell and said, "My name is Miguel, and I'm here to sing for my dad." The room fell into a quiet stillness. Heidi smiled warmly and asked where his dad was. Miguel paused, his little chest rising and falling as if he needed courage just to answer. Then, with a voice both fragile and brave, he said, "My father was a soldier. He fought for his country, but he never made it back home. He died before I could sing for him." The silence grew heavier. You could almost hear hearts breaking in that moment. The camera panned across the audience, showing tearful eyes, parents holding their children's hands, and veterans in uniform nodding solemnly. Even Howie Mandel, who often lightens the mood with jokes, lowered his head in respect. Simon leaned forward, his eyes narrowing not in judgment but in compassion. The boy stood under the bright stage lights, small and vulnerable, yet his presence filled the entire theater. It was not just an audition anymore, it was a son's way of keeping his father's memory alive. Miguel continued softly, "I never got the chance to sing for him while he was alive, so tonight, I want to sing as if he's listening from above." His words struck like a quiet thunder, echoing in every corner of the auditorium. The crowd erupted into gentle applause, not out of excitement, but out of respect for the boy's courage. At that moment, everyone in the room knew they were about to witness something more than a performance. This was not about fame, or money, or even winning the show. It was about love, a boy's love for his fallen father, a son's voice reaching out to heaven. As the lights dimmed and the first note prepared to rise, the AGT stage was no longer just a stage, it became a bridge between earth and eternity, between a son and his hero. The theater fell into absolute silence as the music began. A single spotlight bathed Miguel in a soft golden glow, making him appear even smaller against the vast AGT stage. He closed his eyes, took a trembling breath, and then released the very first note. It wasn't just a sound. It was a cry, a whisper, and a prayer all at once. The note carried the weight of a boy who had lost too much too soon, yet somehow found the courage to turn his pain into song. His voice cracked slightly at first, raw and unpolished, but within moments, it grew steadier, like a flame catching strength against the wind. The lyrics told the story of a child missing his father, of nights spent wishing for one more hug, of dreams where he could still hear his dad's laughter. Each word seemed to tear open his heart, and yet, he sang them with such purity that the audience could feel every wound, every longing. By the second verse, Miguel lifted his gaze to the ceiling, as though he was singing directly to heaven. His small hands gripped the microphone, his body trembling, but his voice soared higher, stronger. The theater was frozen, no whispers, no coughs, not even a shuffle of feet. Every soul was hanging on to every note. The camera cut to the judges. Sofia Vergara pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath. Howie Mandel leaned forward, his face filled with both admiration and sadness. Heidi's eyes glistened, her lips trembling as if she wanted to comfort the boy, but the most striking reaction came from Simon. He wasn't just watching, he was listening with his heart, his head tilted slightly, his eyes locked on Miguel as though he recognized something painfully real. And then came the chorus. Miguel's voice cracked with emotion, but instead of breaking, it reached even deeper. The audience gasped, then many began to cry openly. A mother in the crowd hugged her child tightly. A veteran in uniform stood, saluting in silence. This wasn't just a performance anymore, it was a message, a tribute, a love letter to a father who gave everything. By the final line, Miguel's voice was barely a whisper, yet it resonated like thunder. His entire being was in that song, and when he stopped singing, the silence that followed was just as powerful as the music itself. The boy lowered the mic, his chest heaving, his eyes wet. And in that stillness, the world realized, they had not just heard a song. They had witnessed a son's heart reaching beyond the grave. For a moment, the theater stayed frozen in silence, as if no one dared to breathe after Miguel's final note faded into the air. Then, slowly, a sound began to rise, not from the stage, but from the crowd. It was the sound of sniffles, of hands brushing tears from faces, of hearts breaking in unison. The cameras swept across the audience, capturing emotions too raw to hide. A mother in the front row hugged her little boy tightly, her tears soaking into his hair. An elderly veteran, standing tall in his uniform, removed his cap and pressed it against his chest, his shoulders shaking as tears rolled down his weathered face. A teenage girl in the balcony whispered to her friend, "That could be me. That could be any of us." By the second chorus, the crowd could no longer stay seated. Row by row, section by section, people rose to their feet, clapping and cheering through their tears. It wasn't the usual standing ovation of excitement, it was something deeper, heavier. It was an ovation of respect, of solidarity, of gratitude for the boy who dared to sing through his pain. The energy in the room began to shift. The walls of the theater, usually filled with laughter and applause, now held something sacred. Strangers reached for each other's hands. Parents wiped their children's tears. The entire space had become one family, united in grief and love for a boy who reminded them of sacrifice, loss, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. The cameras then cut to the judges, and their emotions mirrored the crowd's. Heidi's mascara streaked down her face as she whispered, "That was so beautiful." Sophia dabbed her eyes with a tissue, shaking her head in disbelief at the boy's strength. Howie simply stared, his hands pressed together in silent respect. But the most unexpected reaction was still Simon's. He leaned back in his chair, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes fixed on Miguel as if he had forgotten there were cameras at all. His usual steel-like demeanor cracked. He was no longer the judge, but simply a father, a human being, moved to his core. As the final echoes of applause filled the theater, Miguel looked overwhelmed. He pressed his small hands to his chest and whispered softly, "For you, Dad." Though only the cameras close to the stage caught it, the words carried the weight of the entire performance. This was no ordinary audition. It was a moment that transformed a crowd of thousands into witnesses of love, loss, and healing, and every single soul in that room knew they had just been part of something unforgettable. When the applause finally began to fade, the cameras shifted to the judges' table. Normally, this was the moment for witty remarks, light-hearted banter, or Simon Cowell's trademark sharp critiques. But, tonight, none of that happened. Simon sat completely still, his hands folded on the desk, his eyes fixed on the boy who stood trembling under the spotlight. For a long moment, he didn't speak at all. The audience, sensing the weight of the silence, grew quiet once more. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what Simon would say. Finally, Simon leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk, and spoke in a voice softer than anyone expected. "Miguel," he began, pausing as if to steady his own emotions. "I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard thousands of singers walk onto this stage, but I don't think I've ever heard a voice like yours." The boy's eyes widened, and a hush fell over the theater. Simon continued, his words faltering just slightly as his emotions slipped through. "It wasn't just your voice, it was your heart. I could feel your pain. I could feel your love for your father. And I don't think there's a person in this room who wasn't moved by that." For the first time in years, Simon's eyes shimmered under the lights. He blinked rapidly, his jaw tightening as though he was trying to push the tears back. The cameras caught it, the faint crack in his famously unshakable armor. The audience gasped softly. They had seen Simon be harsh, strict, even brutally honest, but never vulnerable. This moment was different. This wasn't the judge speaking. This was Simon Cowell, the man, the father, recognizing the power of a child's grief transformed into music. He leaned back for a moment, covering his mouth with his hand, clearly trying to compose himself. Then, with a deep breath, he looked at Miguel again and said, "You came here tonight to sing for your dad. I want you to know, you did him proud. He's looking down on you, and I know he's proud." The audience erupted again, some cheering, others crying even harder. Miguel lowered his head, clutching the microphone as if those words gave him the strength to keep standing. Simon shook his head slightly, almost as if words weren't enough to capture what he felt. It was one of the rarest moments in AGT history, when the toughest judge on television was left speechless by the purity of a child's love and the power of a single song. The theater was still buzzing from Simon's heartfelt words, but Miguel stood frozen under the lights, unsure of what would happen next. His small chest rose and fell quickly, his hands clutching the microphone as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. Then, slowly, Simon pushed back his chair and stood up. The audience stirred. Something was about to happen. Simon placed both hands on the table, staring directly at the boy. His voice, firm yet emotional, rang out, "Miguel, sometimes, a performance is more than just a performance. Tonight, you gave us more than a song. You gave us your heart, your story, your father's memory. And for me," he paused, his voice breaking just slightly, "that deserves this." With one swift motion, Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The theater exploded. A loud metallic clang echoed, followed by the unmistakable sound of the buzzer's siren. And then, it rained. Golden confetti burst from the ceiling, cascading down like stardust, swirling through the lights until it covered the stage in shimmering gold. Miguel gasped, his little hands flying to his face. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the moment. The audience roared, thousands rising to their feet, clapping, cheering, screaming his name. Some were crying, others shouting, but all were united in the magic of what they had just witnessed. Simon, for once, didn't sit back and let the moment play out. He walked toward the stage, his face softer than anyone had ever seen. Heidi, Sophia, and Howie followed, clapping through their tears. As Simon reached the stage, he bent down and pulled Miguel into a hug. The boy sobbed into his chest, clutching the judge like a lifeline. "You did it," Simon whispered, his microphone catching just enough of his words for the world to hear. "You made him proud." The golden confetti stuck to Miguel's hair, his face wet with tears, but he lifted his eyes toward the ceiling. In that instant, it felt as if he wasn't looking at the cameras, or the judges, or even the audience. He was looking higher, looking to his father, as if to say, "This is for you." The crowd chanted his name, the lights gleamed brighter, and the moment became immortal. This wasn't just television. This wasn't just a competition. It was a son's love turned into history, a performance that would live forever in AGT legend. And as the last pieces of golden confetti floated gently to the ground, the boy who came to sing for his fallen father had become a star.